And as you said, the most recent battle was in Wisconsin this year when Democratic Governor Tony Evers proposed changing the name of the evergreen at the Capitol to Holiday Tree.
That some of our residents are non-Christians. In another draft, they actually use the word avowed atheists.
We sent not only this one this year, but also this huge one, which is really probably the gaudiest Christmas card I've ever seen.
Christmas in America. You may remember about 10 years ago, the Factor began spotlighting companies that refused to say the words, Merry Christmas.
Banning the baby Jesus, that's the subject of today's commentary.
2 high school cheerleaders are helping keep prayer on the field when school administrators caved to pressure from the atheist groups to pull the Lord's Prayer from the PA system before football games.
And then it reached its apex when some major corporations ordered their employees not to say Merry Christmas. Do you remember that?
It's a not-so-merry start to the holiday season, the Christmas holiday season, that is. The city of Santa Monica has decided out in California to end their 60-year Christmas tradition of setting up nativity scenes along Ocean Avenue right there.
In Tennessee, the ACLU has sent a letter to 137 school superintendents warning them not to emphasize Christmas this year. Quote,
Bah humbug. The ACLU Scrooge's public schools, warning them not to say Merry Christmas.
We all know the battle cry of Christians after Thanksgiving.
The war on Christmas in full swing.
Fortunately, Steve, the first salvo in the war on Christmas this year.
So is the war on Christmas going way too far?
One of them. Do you think it delegitimizes the war against Christmas? Because, I mean...
Since the war has basically been won, this is a cleanup operation. But the information is valid.
Thank you, President Trump, for letting us say Merry Christmas again.
Oh, okay. So is President Trump winning the so-called war on Christmas?
Griswold took on his homeowners organization and their war on Christmas, and he won.
An Idaho family. Well, regardless of what Amazon has done, the fact is there's a mountain of evidence to prove that the birth of Jesus is not fake news, it's real news.
Sometimes, even before Thanksgiving is over, the war on Christmas has begun. Where did this fantasy war on one of the most commercialized and secularized holidays of the year start? What was the first shot heard around the United States? Get your Nerf guns ready, because today we're going to dive into the history of the war on Christmas. A history drenched in anti-Semitism, violations of church-state separation, religious fear-mongering, and blatantly false information that reaches all the way back to before this nation was founded. If you're interested in how Christian nationalists continuously fight a fantasy war on themselves, then please stay tuned. Now, when I first realized I was an atheist almost more than 10 years ago, I had no idea that there was such a war on Christmas. I mean, I had no issues with Happy Holidays versus Merry Christmas, and I still don't. But then came good old Bill O'Reilly.
Christmas in America. You may remember about 10 years ago, the Factor began spotlighting companies that refused to say the words Merry Christmas. In fact, some of those businesses actually ordered their employees not to say that. Well, that culture war issue ignited, and we won.
Wait, why did people say that O'Reilly made up the war on Christmas? While he didn't start this fantasy war, his reasons for firing his own personal shot in it didn't differ that much from the actual first shot. You see, O'Reilly fired his shot because of progressive liberalism. Now, all of this anti-Christian stuff is absurd, and may even be a biased situation. But the real reason it's happening has little to do with Christmas and everything to do with organized religion. Secular progressives realize that America, as it is now, will never approve of gay marriage, partial birth abortion, euthanasia, legalized drugs, income redistribution through taxation, and many other progressive visions because of religious opposition. But if the secularists can destroy religion in the public arena, the brave new progressive world is a possibility. That's what happened in Canada. Basically, what O'Reilly did here was he balled up every single thing that conservatives of the day really valued, wrapped it up really nice, and then affixed it to one thing that everybody could stand behind: defending the one holiday that they held so dearly, Christmas. But this wasn't the first time that happened. In fact, it is the exact way that Henry Ford started this fantasy war on Christmas back in the 1920s. In 1921, Henry Ford wrote a series of pamphlets called The International Jew, the world's foremost problem. These pamphlets chronicled the efforts of Jewish Americans fighting for the separation of church and state, namely the separation of church and the public schools. Not only do the Jews disagree with Christian teaching, which is their perfect right and no one dare question it, but they seek to interfere with it. It is not religious tolerance in the midst of religious difference, but religious attack that they preach and practice. The whole record of Jewish opposition to Christmas, Easter, and certain patriotic songs show that. The doubters felt that the Jews began to make such demands as the Christmas carols should be suppressed in the schools, as offensive to the Jews, and that Christmas trees should be banished from police stations in poor neighborhoods as offensive to the Jews, and the Easter holiday should be abolished as offensive to the Jews. At this point in time, that would have been seen as a progressive liberal undertaking. His complaints centered around Jewish people having issues with Bible readings being mandatory or prayers being mandatory, and blatantly Christian Christmas carols being sung in the schools. More importantly, their children being forced to sing these Christmas hymns. Jews were the first to take a stand against Christianity being proselytized in the public school system, to all of the children in the public school system. You know what this means? The issues that atheists are fighting now, being the forced Bible reading in schools or the forced prayer in schools, and just this whole Christian religion being mixed in with the public school system, the Jews were the initial ones fighting that battle for us. And this all started over 100 years ago. After this point, though, the war quieted down for a bit. There was kind of a ceasefire, I guess. But then, 30 years after Henry Ford fired his first shot, it sparked again at the start of the Cold War. During the 1950s, we saw a resurgence of religiosity as the Cold War started with Russia. You see, we had to separate our national identity from those godless commies in Russia. This is also the time when we worked in God We Trust as our motto instead of E Pluribus Unum, and we changed our national anthem to include One Nation Under God. Also during this time, church attendance rose 6% from 57% to 63.3%. You see, at this time, many towns wanted to put the Christ back into Christmas by placing these nativity scenes in public spaces like schools and courthouses. They also wanted to push having religion taught in public schools. The National Council of the Churches of Christ, a collection of about 30 Protestant denominations, approved a resolution that called for religious lessons to be taught in public schools. The resolution said, "It is expected that public schools shall teach that religion is an essential aspect of our national heritage and culture, that this nation subsists under the governance of God, and that our moral and ethical values rest upon religious grounds and sanctions. To do otherwise would be to distort history." It's hard not to hear that resounding statement in today's cultural climate. You see, at this particular time, Alabama, Pennsylvania, and Maryland all required prayer and Bible lessons in their public school systems. Primarily at this time, Catholics and Jews were the main proponents for the separation of church and state. This is because a majority of America was some kind of Protestant denomination. And so during these prayers and Bible lessons, they were pushing a Protestant version of Christianity, which Catholics wouldn't like, but also Jews and other religions wouldn't like as well. In 1957, Jules Cohen, the national coordinator of the Jewish organization called National Community Relations Advisory Council, claimed that the principle of separation of church and state is under attack from many quarters and in a variety of ways. That statement was soon proven to be true, as a nativity scene was petitioned to be put up in a public school in Ossining, New York. The high school received several letters from parents who didn't want this nativity scene to go up, complaining that it would be a violation of the First Amendment. The Board of Education reconsidered and retracted their approval for the nativity scene. Reverend Frank Klausman claimed that the Board of Education have allowed themselves to be coerced by a few and, in the name of tolerance, have committed an act of intolerance. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? It seems like a lot of the rhetoric that's being used now. In 1963, the American atheists started challenging a number of church-state violations, namely prayer in school. This is the beginning of secular organizations taking the same stand that Jewish organizations had taken years before. In 1970, the Freedom from Religion Foundation was founded by Ann and Annie Gaylor. They too would start fighting against the violations of church-state separation, both in public schools as well as in the public sphere in general. This is why it is now seen as an atheist attack on Christmas. Obviously, these secularists weren't trying to attack Christmas. They just value the First Amendment and the wall of separation that it provides. This is the same wall of separation that Jewish organizations were fighting so hard to keep intact more than 40 years earlier. And of course, after that point, there were many small scuffles in this war on Christmas. Nationally, we saw Supreme Court cases where both wins and losses happened. Stone v. Graham prevented the Ten Commandments from being posted in school classrooms, while Lynch versus Donnelly allowed religious symbols to be displayed alongside non-religious symbols in public schools. Locally, though, history always repeats itself. Every year since the 1950s, this war on Christmas starts just after Thanksgiving. These battles in the war on Christmas are fought in the public classrooms, courthouses, and state capitals. You see, on one side, you have religious and non-religious minorities, and on the other side, you have the Christian majority. So what is this war on Christmas really about? Is it actually about keeping the Christ in Christmas? Obviously not. Christmas is a shield that the religious majority uses to convince the masses that their dominance is the only thing that should matter. This war is about maintaining the Christian dominance over the American identity while trampling on the rights of the religious and non-religious minorities. This war is about anti-Semitism and extremist propaganda meant to polarize Americans. There is no war on Christmas. There are only whimpers of Christian nationalists who see their dominance in public spaces being challenged. It would be a shame if I didn't point out the one time in what would become the United States that Christmas was actually banned. Except it wasn't those immoral atheists or those pesky Jews that banned Christmas in what would become America. In fact, it was Puritan Christians. For preventing disorders arising in several places within this jurisdiction by reason of some still observing such festivals as were superstitiously kept in other countries, to the great dishonor of God and offense of others. It is therefore ordered by this court and the authority thereof that whosoever shall be found observing any such day as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, feasting, or any other way, upon such accountants as aforesaid, every person so offending shall pay every such offense 5 shillings as a fine to the county. And the Puritans banned Christmas for 22 years. Now this happened in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And even though these OG Puritans don't technically even exist now, their doctrines can be seen in most Protestant denominations. There are even some Christians today that loathe Christmas.
Let us adore him, okay? Really, this is Odin's Christmas tree. Would you ever sacrifice your kids to a pagan god? Would you even pretend that you were doing it? Like, would you ever do a voodoo doll of your kid and then display it in your house? Because that's what you're doing when you have a Christmas tree. Are you aware of that? Like,
well, heathens, I hope you will get your Nerf guns ready to fight this war on Christmas. For now, and it seems like forever. I mean, pretty much forever, we're going to be fighting this war. So, you know, make sure you got your magazines loaded. Let's go and fight this war. Hey, if you will, please leave me a comment down below with what you think about this particular video. What do you think about the war on Christmas? What do you think about the history of the war on Christmas? Let me know in those comments. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, especially to protect the wall of separation between church and state. Bye, heathens. I gotta go and kill me some elves. Gonna get this war on Christmas start. Well, it's been started for a while. I'm gonna go and do my part to fight this war on Christmas. Here we go.